My parents left me at a train station as a joke. They laughed and bet I could find my way home. I was 9 years old. My parents were laughing. Not the kind of laughing that makes you feel warm. Not the kind that pulls you in. This was the other kind. The kind that has edges. The kind where you're not in on the joke. You're the joke. My father looked at my mother, and my mother looked at my father, and they both looked at me standing on that platform with my little red backpack and my shoes that were one size too small. And my father said, "Let's see if she can find her way home." And then they walked away. I watched their backs disappear into the crowd. I waited for them to turn around. I waited for the punchline to land somewhere soft. I waited for the part where one of them came back and grabbed my hand and said, "Got you," the way parents are supposed to do when they go too far. They didn't turn around. The train pulled in. People pushed past me. A woman bumped my shoulder and didn't look back. The announcement over the speakers said something I didn't understand, and the crowd thinned out, and the platform got quieter, and I was still standing there, alone. I was 9 years old, in a train station I didn't know, in a city that didn't care. And somewhere in that building, my parents were watching the clock to see how long it would take me to cry. That was the day I stopped being a child. Here's what I need you to understand before we go any further. This wasn't the first time. People who hear this story always say the same thing. They were probably just trying to teach you independence. Or maybe it was a cultural thing. Or the worst one, I'm sure they didn't mean it like that. So let me tell you how they meant it. When I was 6, my father hid my favorite stuffed animal, a brown rabbit I called Benny, and told me someone had thrown it away. I cried for 3 days. He kept it in the trunk of his car for a month. He never told me he'd taken it. I found it by accident. He laughed. He said, "I was just seeing how long you'd cry." When I was 7, my mother told me during dinner that she and my father had decided to send me to live with my grandmother permanently. She said it calmly, between bites of food, like she was reading from a grocery list. I didn't sleep for 2 nights. I packed a bag. I said goodbye to my room. 2 days later, she told me it had been a test. She wanted to see if I would be dramatic. I had been. Apparently. When I was 8, they dropped me at a park 3 miles from our house and drove away. I was supposed to find my way home. My father called it a navigation lesson. I called it the afternoon I learned that crying doesn't make anyone come faster. So by the time we reached the train station, by the time I was 9 and standing on that platform watching them leave, I wasn't even fully surprised. I was just tired. This is what growing up in my house looked like. Every fear I had became a game for them. Every tear I shed was data they were collecting. My panic was entertainment, and my trust was a thing they borrowed and returned with damage every single time. They called it tough love. I called it something else. It took me years to find the word for it, but I'll get to that. Back to the train station. I stood there for what felt like an hour. Maybe it was 20 minutes. Maybe it was longer. Time moves differently when you're scared and alone and 9 years old. I did what I always did. I waited. I told myself they were coming back. I made deals with the universe. If I count to 100 and they're not here, I'll walk to the exit. If I count to 200, I'll ask someone for help. I counted to 500. They didn't come. I finally walked up to a woman sitting on a bench near the main doors. She had a paper cup of coffee and a kind face. I told her my name. I told her I didn't know how to get home. I didn't cry. I'd already learned that crying didn't work. But my voice shook in a way I couldn't stop. She called the station manager. The station manager called the police. A female officer with a short ponytail and a patient voice sat with me for 45 minutes, asking me questions I knew the answers to, my address, my parents' names, my phone number, while her partner went to find them. They found my parents in the station cafe, 2 floors up, having coffee, watching the clock. The officer brought them to me with a look on her face I still remember to this day, not angry, not shocked, just tired. The specific tiredness of someone who has seen this before and knows exactly what kind of people she's looking at. My mother looked embarrassed, not at what she'd done, at being caught. My father made a joke. He always made jokes when he was caught. He said something about kids needing to learn to be resourceful. The officer looked at him the way you look at something you've stepped in. They drove me home in silence. Nobody apologized. Nobody ever apologized. But something had changed. Not in them. In me. Because standing on that platform, counting to 500, I had made a decision so quietly that I barely heard it myself. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't the kind of thing you announce. It was just this. I am going to leave. And when I leave, I am never going to need them again. I was 9 years old when I made that promise to myself. It took me 15 years to keep it. I want to tell you about the years between the train station and the day I left, because they matter, because they're the part people skip when they tell stories like mine, and skipping them is a lie. I didn't become strong overnight. Nobody does. What I became slowly was strategic. I stopped handing my parents anything real to use against me. I stopped telling them what I was afraid of. I stopped showing them what I cared about. I learned to keep my interior life behind glass. They could see it, but they couldn't touch it. I got good at school, not because anyone pushed me to, because school was the one place I could be seen for something other than what I was at home. My teachers thought I was calm. My friends thought I was mature. None of them knew that I had been practicing calm since I was 6 years old, because the alternative was giving my parents something to study. I got a job at 16, babysitting, then a cafe, then a small office filing papers on weekends. I saved every dollar. I didn't spend money on things I wanted. I spent it on things I'd need. A bus pass, a backup fund, the beginnings of a plan. I told nobody what I was planning. That was important. The moment you tell people you're leaving, they have opinions. They want to mediate. They want to talk. They think the right conversation can fix what years of wrong ones have built. I didn't want to fix it. I wanted to leave. I applied to universities in cities I'd never been to. I applied to scholarships I didn't think I'd get. I applied with the quiet desperation of someone building a ladder out of whatever's on the ground. I got in. The morning I received my acceptance letter, I sat in my bedroom and read it 4 times. Then I folded it up, put it in the inside pocket of my school bag, and went downstairs and made breakfast like it was any other day. I didn't tell my parents for 2 weeks. When I finally did, my mother cried, not for me, but for herself. She said she didn't know how she'd manage. My father said universities were expensive and unnecessary and asked why I couldn't just stay local. I looked at them both at the kitchen table, these 2 people who had left me on a platform at 9 years old to see what I'd do, and I said, I've already accepted. I leave in August. 3 words they hadn't taught me. It's already done. I moved 240 miles away. I remember loading the last box into the taxi and standing in the doorway of my childhood home, that house that had always felt more like a testing ground than a home, and I felt something unexpected. Not sadness, not anger, relief. The specific physical relief of setting down something very heavy that you've been carrying so long, you forgot it wasn't your natural weight. The first year was hard. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. I didn't have money. I had a part-time job and student loans and a room barely big enough for a bed and a desk. And I ate a lot of instant noodles and told myself this was still better. This was still better than being comfortable in a house where I was someone's experiment. I was right. I started therapy in my 2nd year. The therapist had round glasses and a very still way of sitting, and she said something in our 3rd session that rearranged something in me. She said, when children are taught that their fear is amusing, they learn one of 2 things, either that they deserve to be afraid or that they must never be afraid of anything again. Which did you learn? I sat with that for a long time. I had learned both. I had spent my whole childhood being afraid and pretending I wasn't, which is not the same as being brave. Brave people feel fear and move through it. What I had learned was to feel fear and perform calm, which is exhausting in a way that doesn't show on the outside until your body starts charging interest. So I relearned things slowly. I learned to say what I was afraid of, to myself first, then eventually to people I trusted. I learned to let kindness in without waiting for the catch. I learned that some people laugh with you, not at you. That some people stay. I made friends, real ones. The kind who didn't think my childhood stories were funny. The kind who said, that's not okay, without needing me to convince them first. I graduated. First in my department. I didn't call my parents that day, not out of revenge. I just didn't think about them. which was its own kind of milestone. I got a job, then a better one. Then I built something of my own, slowly, imperfectly, with a lot of late nights and very bad coffee. I became the person I would have been all along if I'd had a different starting point. And then, as things do, the past came back. I want to pause here and tell you what my life looked like from the outside by the time I was 28, because it matters. Not for the sake of bragging, I have no interest in that, but because you need to understand what I had become in order to understand what happened next. I had an apartment I loved, not large, not expensive, but mine, fully mine. Every corner of it decided by me, no one else's tastes or needs or criticisms embedded in the walls. I had plants I kept alive. I had a kitchen that always smelled like something real. I had a career I had built from nothing. I managed a team of 12 people. I was known in my field, not famous, not celebrated in any public way, but respected. People called me when they had hard problems. I had developed a reputation for being calm in a crisis, which is funny if you know where I learned that skill. I had close friends who knew me. Not the performance of me. Me. I had a therapist I still saw once a month because I had learned that maintenance is not weakness. I had a savings account that made me feel safe in a way I had never felt as a child. I had boundaries, real ones, practiced and held, not just words I said in theory. I had peace. That is not a small thing. People underestimate peace. They think it's passive, like nothing is happening. But peace, real, earned peace, is the result of enormous work. It is the thing you build after you've cleared the rubble out. It doesn't arrive. You construct it, room by room, decision by decision. I was 28 years old, and for the first time in my life, I felt safe. And then my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer. I was in the middle of making dinner, something with garlic and good olive oil, and I was happy. That's the detail I keep coming back to. I was just happy in a very quiet, ordinary way. I answered. It was my aunt, my mother's sister, who I had not spoken to in 4 years. She and I had always been careful with each other. She knew things about my childhood she never said out loud, and I knew she knew, and we had existed in that wordless understanding for years. Her voice was different. Not her voice exactly, but what she was doing with it. There was a performance of casualness that I recognized immediately because I had spent my entire childhood around people who performed emotion they weren't feeling. She said my parents were having a difficult time. She said my mother had health problems. She said this vaguely, the way people say things when they want the vagueness to do work. She said my father had made some financial decisions that hadn't gone the way he'd hoped. She said they had asked her to reach out. She said they wanted to reconnect. I stood in my kitchen with a wooden spoon in my hand and let the silence sit there for a long moment. Then I asked, "What kind of health problems?" She told me. I asked, "What kind of financial decisions?" She told me that too. I thanked her. I told her I'd think about it. I put the phone down and stood at my stove and watched the garlic begin to brown at the edges, and I felt something I had not felt in a very long time. Not sadness, not panic. Not the desperate, scrambling need to fix things that had been my default for most of my childhood. I felt something cold and clear and fully awake. I turned down the heat on the stove. I sat at my kitchen table, and I thought for a long time about what I wanted to do. I need you to understand something about this moment, because when I tell people what happened next, they always assume the same thing, that I rushed to my parents, that I dropped everything. That guilt pulled me back the way it pulls so many people back, especially daughters who were taught from childhood that their parents' comfort was more important than their own survival. That's not what happened. I took 3 days. I didn't return calls. I didn't send messages saying I was thinking about it or that I needed time, because I had learned a long time ago that silence is information, that what you don't say communicates things that words can't. I sat with the reality of the situation plainly. My parents, the people who had turned my fear into sport, who had left me on a platform at 9 years old and gone upstairs for coffee, who had never once apologized, not for that or for any of the 100 smaller things. My parents now needed something. They needed money or help or comfort or all three. and they had sent someone else to ask because they knew that if they called themselves, I might not answer. They were right. I thought about the woman I had been at 9 years old, standing on that platform, counting to 500, deciding in the most interior part of herself that she was going to build a life that didn't include them. I thought about everything that woman had done to keep that promise. And I thought about what I wanted now, not out of anger, not out of revenge, but just as a clean, honest question. What do I want? Here is what I wanted. I wanted to go. Not because I owed them anything, not because I was afraid of how it would look if I didn't, but because I had something they had never given me, and I wanted to show up with it anyway. I wanted to go so that I could close something, not for them, for me. I called my aunt back and told her I would come, the following Saturday. I would not be staying. I drove. 6 hours. I had made the same drive the other direction, at 22, with a car full of boxes, feeling like someone who had escaped something. Now I was driving back, not escaping, not returning, just going. There's a difference. The house looked smaller. Houses always look smaller when you come back. The details are the same. Same porch, same chipped paint on the front steps, same small window above the kitchen sink. But the scale has changed because you have changed. You've grown in ways that spaces can't. My mother opened the door. She had aged. Of course she had. It had been years. But there was something else. Something that aging alone doesn't do. A careful quality to her face, a watching, like she was trying to read what I was before I got to the door. She said my name. She reached out and touched my arm. I let her. My father was in the living room. He stood up when I came in, and for just a moment he looked uncertain, and I want to sit with that for a second, because I had never seen my father look uncertain. Certain was the thing he always was, with his jokes and his tests and his lessons. The certainty was the whole point. The certainty was how he maintained control. He didn't have it now. We sat. My mother made tea she knew I didn't want. We talked around things for a while, the drive, the weather, how I was doing at work, and I let them do it because I was not in a hurry. I had learned patience on a train station platform. I could wait. Finally, my father began to explain. The investments, the debts, the medical bills, the sequence of events that had brought them to this point. He explained it all with a certain dignity, almost formal, and I recognized what he was doing. He was presenting the information the way you present it when you need something. Organized, reasonable, sanded down at the edges. I listened to all of it. Then I said, I want to talk about something before we go any further. My mother looked at her tea. My father went still. I said, when I was 9 years old, you left me on a train station platform. Do you remember that? My father started to speak. I'm not asking for an explanation, I said. I'm asking if you remember. A long pause. Yes, my mother said quietly. That was one of many things, I said. The rabbit, the park, the dinner when you told me I was being sent away. I could list them if you want, but I don't think that would be useful. Neither of them spoke. What I want to say is this, I continued. I spent my entire childhood being afraid, and every time I was afraid, you treated it like a game. You called it toughening me up. But what it actually did was teach me that the people who are supposed to protect you are the ones you have to protect yourself from. My mother's eyes were wet. I kept my voice even. I wasn't angry. I had been angry. I had lived in that anger for years, burned through it, and come out the other side. What I was now was something else. Clear. I don't hate you, I said. I want to make sure that's understood. But I also don't have a relationship with you, and I think what you want from this visit is for me to provide something, money, or help, or reconnection, and I need you to know that I'm not here for that. I came because I wanted to say what I just said. Then why come at all? My father asked, and it was meant to sound hard, but it landed soft. Because I needed to say it out loud, I said, and I needed you to hear it, not for you, for me. The room was very quiet. My mother said she was sorry. I had waited 20 years for those 3 words. When they came, they were smaller than I thought they'd be. Not worthless. There was something real in them, something tired and genuine and too late. But small. You can want an apology your whole life and receive it and still feel the absence of everything that came before it. "Thank you," I said, and I meant it. I didn't give them money. I want to be direct about that because people always ask. I didn't give them money, and I didn't move them closer to me, and I didn't offer to manage their situation. I made sure my mother knew about resources that existed. I had looked into it before I came, because I am always prepared, which is something they taught me accidentally, but I was not their solution. I was not going to be their solution. This is the part people find hardest to understand. They say, "But they're your parents, they're struggling." And yes, they are. And yes, they are. Both of those things are true, and neither of them is a reason to rebuild a relationship on the same foundation that already failed. Helping someone doesn't mean rescuing them from the consequences of how they treated you. I stayed for 2 hours. I drank the tea I didn't want. I answered questions about my life with as much as I wanted to share, which was not much. I was polite. I was even, at moments, kind. When I left, I hugged my mother, briefly, carefully, and I shook my father's hand, which felt strange and right at the same time. I drove back the same day. 6 hours in the dark this time with the radio on low and the road unrolling ahead of me, and I felt something I had not expected to feel. Finished, not done. Life doesn't tie up like that. But finished in the way a chapter is finished. You can go back and read it again, but you can't change what it says, and eventually you stop needing to. I thought about the 9-year-old on the platform, the one who counted to 500, the one who decided, in the quiet interior where no one was watching and nothing was a test, that she was going to build something. She had. She had built it quietly, without anyone's help, with no roadmap and no guarantee and no applause. She had built it slowly and imperfectly and persistently, the way real things are built, and she was driving home to it now. That was the revenge, not their suffering, not my absence making them desperate, not the day they needed something and had to reach out through a third party because they knew I might not answer. The revenge was this: I was free, and they were not. I had peace, and they had consequence. I had built a life, and they had, somehow inexplicably, expected it to include them. It didn't, and that was okay. I've told this story to very few people, not because I'm ashamed. I stopped being ashamed of my childhood somewhere around my 3rd year of therapy when I understood that the things that happened to me were not a reflection of my worth. I've told this story to few people because I'm protective of it, because it belongs to that 9-year-old and she deserves to have something that's just hers. But I'm telling you now because I think there are people watching this who need to hear it. People who grew up in houses where their fear was a game. People whose pain was reframed as drama, as sensitivity, as something to be corrected rather than witnessed. People who have spent so long managing other people's emotions that they don't know what their own feel like anymore. People who are still waiting for an apology that may never come and building their life around that waiting and wondering if they're allowed to move forward without it. You are. You are allowed to move forward without the apology. You are allowed to build something beautiful out of the rubble they left, and you are allowed to not include them in it. Not out of cruelty, out of self-preservation, out of respect for what you've worked to build. Here is what I know. Real family does not test your pain. Real love does not have an audience. Real parents do not leave you on a platform to see what you'll do. And if yours did, if yours treated your fear as entertainment and your trust as raw material, then you are not dramatic. You are not too sensitive. You are not ungrateful. You are someone who deserved better, and better is something you can build. I did it. Not perfectly, not without help, not without years of wrong turns and hard conversations and moments where I wasn't sure I was going to make it to the other side, but I made it, and the train station is very far behind me now. If something in this story touched you, if you recognize something in it, please leave a comment. Not for me, for the next person who reads it and needs to know they're not alone. And if this is your first time here, welcome. There's more where this came from.